For decades, rock fans have loved debating the great rivalries. The Beatles versus the Stones. Blur versus Oasis. But for Roger Waters, the creative force behind Pink Floyd's most legendary albums, the real enemy wasn't some other band. It was the very band he had built. This is the story of why Roger Waters spent years trying to tear down the version of Pink Floyd led by David Gilmour. It's a fight that goes way beyond music or money, digging into the very soul of what Pink Floyd was, is, and ever could be. This isn't just a breakup story, it's a war for a legacy, fought between two titans who, together, made some of the most beautiful music in history. Apart, they spent decades stuck in one of its absolute ugliest feuds. To get the hate, you first have to get the partnership. When Pink Floyd bubbled up from the London underground in the mid-60s, they were led by the brilliant, erratic, and ultimately tragic Syd Barrett. His wild psychedelic vision was their entire sound. But as Barrett's mental health spiraled, the band had a choice: burn out with their founder or find a new path. In 1967, they brought in David Gilmour, a phenomenal guitarist and singer whose melodic touch was the perfect foil to the band's experimental edge. And for a while, it just worked. After Barrett's departure, a new creative core took shape. It was a perfect storm of four unique talents: Nick Mason's architectural drumming, Richard Wright's spacey keyboards that gave the band its atmosphere, David Gilmour's soaring guitar and voice, and Roger Waters' sharp, cynical, and brilliant concepts and lyrics. This was the lineup that would take over the world. The Dark Side of the Moon in 1973 wasn't just an album, it was a cultural earthquake. It was a masterpiece of studio craft, musical unity, and thematic depth, with its lyrics, penned entirely by Waters, exploring the pressures of modern life, conflict, and madness. But the album's mind-boggling success started to subtly crack the foundation. With a global monster of a record on their hands, the pressure was immense. The follow-up, Wish You Were Here, was a beautiful tribute to their lost friend Syd, but the recording sessions were filled with tension. The band felt lost, and this is when Waters really started to take the reins creatively. He was already the main lyricist, but now he was becoming the chief architect. He saw Pink Floyd as more than a rock band, it was a stage for his grand, theatrical ideas. The next album, 1977's Animals, was almost all Waters, with Gilmour getting only one co-writing credit. Based on George Orwell's Animal Farm, the album was a bleak, blistering attack on capitalism. The music was aggressive, the themes were dark, and Waters' control was total. Gilmour, whose gift was melody and pure feeling, found his ideas getting pushed to the side for Waters' lyrical and conceptual ambitions. The resentment was starting to build. The two pillars of Pink Floyd's sound were now looking at two very different futures for the band. One saw a platform for political statements, the other a collaboration of musicians making timeless, beautiful music. This basic difference would soon tear them apart. If Animals was where the cracks appeared, The Wall was the earthquake that brought the whole thing down. Released in 1979, The Wall was Roger Waters' masterpiece, a semi-autobiographical rock opera about a tormented rock star named Pink, his isolation, and the metaphorical wall he builds around himself. It was a project of insane ambition, and it came almost entirely from the mind of Roger Waters. The rest of the band were mostly treated like session players, there to execute Waters' grand plan. But David Gilmour wasn't just a session player. He co-produced the album and co-wrote three of its most famous tracks: Comfortably Numb, Run Like Hell, and Young Lust. The guitar solo on Comfortably Numb is often called one of the greatest ever. A moment of pure musical grace from Gilmour that cuts through the album's oppressive story. But even this was a fight, with the two arguing viciously over how the final song should sound. During the recording, the band completely fell apart. Waters, obsessed with the project, became more and more of a dictator. Frustrated by what he saw as a creative laziness from his bandmates, he made a brutal choice: he forced out Richard Wright, the band's founding keyboardist. Wright was given an ultimatum during the 10th sessions and agreed to leave after the album was done. though he was hired back on a salary for the tour. It was a raw power play that left a permanent scar. The tour for the Wall was a massive, money-draining spectacle. A literal wall was built between the band and the crowd during the show, a perfect metaphor for Pink Floyd's internal state. By the end of the tour, they were barely speaking, traveling in separate cars and staying in separate hotels. The friendship was dead, replaced by a cold, business-like arrangement. The final nail in the coffin was 1983's The Final Cut. While it says Pink Floyd on the cover, everyone, including the band, considers it a Roger Waters solo record. Dedicated to his father who died in World War II, it was a deeply personal anti-war album. Gilmour, feeling he had no real creative part to play, barely even features on it. He wanted to write new music and bring the band back to a collaborative place, but Waters wouldn't budge. This was his project. Gilmour later called the whole experience miserable. The tension was so thick that the band had fractured. In 1985, the inevitable finally happened. Roger Waters officially left Pink Floyd, the band he'd led to the top of the world. And as far as he was concerned, when he walked out, Pink Floyd was over. He was about to find out just how wrong he was. When Roger Waters walked away from Pink Floyd in December 1985, he thought he was taking the band's soul with him. He released a statement calling Pink Floyd a spent force creatively. In his mind, Pink Floyd without his ideas was just an empty brand. He figured Gilmour and Mason would go solo, and the legacy of Pink Floyd would be sealed and preserved forever. So you can imagine his fury when he found out, over a year later, that David Gilmour and Nick Mason were planning to carry on using the Pink Floyd name. For Waters, this was blasphemy. A total betrayal. He famously compared it to Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr touring as the Beatles without John Lennon, calling it a fraud that stained the artistic integrity of their life's work. In 1986, he took them to court, launching a legal war in the High Court of Justice in England. He wanted to formally dissolve the Pink Floyd partnership, arguing the band was finished and Gilmour and Mason had no right to the name. He wanted to legally block them from releasing new music or touring as Pink Floyd. The fight that followed got bitter, it got public, and it got incredibly personal. Waters' lawyers invoked a leaving member clause in their old partnership agreement, arguing that since the band wasn't a functioning creative unit anymore, it should be retired for good. Gilmour and Mason fought back hard. Their argument was simple: Roger had quit the band, but the band itself still existed. They were determined to continue the legacy they'd spent nearly 2 decades building. The music world watched, fascinated, as one of rock's most respected bands tore itself apart in court documents and nasty interviews. Waters was relentless, calling the new version of the band a forgery. Gilmour, though quieter, was just as stubborn. He poured his own money into the legal battle and into making a new album, betting his entire reputation and financial future on his right to be Pink Floyd. The legal war dragged on for almost 2 years. In the end, they reached an out-of-court settlement on Christmas Eve of 1987. It was a compromise. Waters was officially released from any contract with the band. In return, Gilmour and Mason won the right to keep using the Pink Floyd name and the famous Flying Pig. Waters, however, kept all the rights to his masterpiece, The Wall, and a share of the rights to other key albums. The legal war was over. The personal war was just getting started. Gilmour had the name, but Waters was now free to be his own artist. This settlement didn't create peace, it just drew the battle lines for 2 rival camps, each claiming to be the true heir to the Pink Floyd throne. With the court case settled, the world now had 2 Pink Floyds, one in name and one in spirit. On one side, you had the official Pink Floyd, led by David Gilmour with Nick Mason and a returning Richard Wright. On the other, you had Roger Waters, a solo artist dead set on proving that he was the real Pink Floyd. In 1987, the Gilmour-led Floyd released a momentary lapse of reason. The title itself felt like a shot at Waters. The album was a massive hit, with singles like Learning to Fly, Musically, it was the polar opposite of Waters' dense, lyric-heavy albums. It was atmospheric, driven by Gilmour's soaring guitar, and melodic. It was a grand, polished, stadium-ready sound. Roger Waters, of course, hated it. He famously trashed the album as a pretty fair forgery. He attacked the lyrics, co-written by outside writers, as weak and meaningless. He saw it as a hollow, commercial imitation. The tour, for a momentary lapse of reason, was gigantic and wildly successful, proving to Gilmour's relief and Waters' fury that there was a huge audience for a Pink Floyd without him. Meanwhile, Waters was on his own tour for his solo album, Radio K.O.S. While it was respected by critics, it was completely dwarfed by the Pink Floyd machine, which sold millions of albums while his sold modestly. To see his old bandmates selling out stadiums with his band's name, playing his songs, was a source of very public bitterness for him. The rivalry hit a symbolic peak in 1990. Waters staged one of the biggest rock concerts ever, The Wall, Live in Berlin, held where the Berlin Wall had just fallen. It was a star-studded spectacle, broadcast to millions, and meant to be his definitive statement, reclaiming his masterpiece on a global stage. But just a few years later, in 1994, Gilmour's Pink Floyd fired back with The Division Bell. It was another smash, hitting #1 in the UK and the US. The album's themes, mostly written by Gilmour's wife Polly Sampson, were all about breakdowns in communication, a clear nod to their own broken history. The tour that followed was even bigger than the last, cementing the Gilmour era as a powerhouse. For years, this was how it was. Two Pink Floyds, circling each other, their creators locked in a cold war of public insults and competing legacies. Waters kept criticizing, and Gilmour kept succeeding, each man on his own path but forever tied to a shared history they could neither escape nor fix. For almost 25 years, the idea of the classic Pink Floyd lineup sharing a stage again seemed like a fantasy. The wounds were too deep, the bitterness too real. Roger Waters and David Gilmour had built separate empires on the rubble of their shared past. Then, in 2005, the impossible happened. The man who made it happen was Bob Geldof, the same guy who starred as Pink in the Wall movie. He was organizing the Live 8 benefit concerts to fight global poverty and knew a Pink Floyd reunion would be a massive global event for the cause. He called each member, pleading with them to set aside their feud for one day, for something bigger than them. After a lot of back and forth, they agreed. For the first time in 24 years, Roger Waters, David Gilmour, Nick Mason, and Richard Wright would perform together as Pink Floyd. On July 2, 2005, they walked onto the stage in London's Hyde Park. The tension was real. But as the first notes of Breathe filled the park, something clicked. The magic, buried under decades of lawsuits and insults, was still there. They played a 4-song set: Breathe, Money, Wish You Were Here, and Comfortably Numb. It was an incredible performance. During Wish You Were Here, Waters dedicated the song to everyone who's not here, but particularly, of course, for Sid. It was a beautiful nod to the friend who started it all. At the end of the set, they stood together, arms around each other's shoulders, a united front for the first time in a generation. Waters later called the experience moving. But the hope that this was a new beginning quickly faded. A reported £136 million, $150 million, offer for a reunion tour was flatly rejected. Gilmour was clear: he was happy it happened for one day, but he wasn't going back to the toxic dynamic of the past. The problems that drove them apart hadn't just vanished. The Live 8 performance wasn't a new chapter. It was a beautiful, heartbreaking epilogue. It was a brief, shining moment that reminded the world what they could do together, but it was also a painful reminder of all that had been lost. The hatchet was buried for a day, but it was never forgotten. The war was over, but they never quite made peace. The hope for peace that flickered after Live 8 didn't last long. The brief truce quickly went back to the familiar Cold War, which has recently exploded into a series of ugly, public fights. The feud wasn't a thing of the past, it was alive and well, finding new battlefields on social media. The fights were often over the one thing they still shared, the Pink Floyd legacy. In 2020, Waters posted a video claiming Gilmour had banned him from the official Pink Floyd website and social media. A few years later, a reissue of the Animals album was held up for years because of a bitter fight over liner notes that Waters wrote, which Gilmour felt downplayed everyone else's contributions. Waters even decided to re-record The Dark Side of the Moon all by himself for its 50th anniversary in 2023. He stripped out Gilmour's iconic solos and writes keyboards, replacing them with his own spoken-word poetry. Many saw it as an attempt to rewrite history, to claim the album as his alone. Gilmour said he hadn't listened to it and found questions about Waters wearisome. The conflict has also become intensely personal, spilling over to their families. Gilmour and his wife, Polly Samson, have Ukrainian family, and after the 2022 invasion, they released a new Pink Floyd song, Hey Hey Rise Up, to support Ukraine. Waters, who has become a very outspoken political figure, slammed the song as contentless flag-waving. This led to the ugliest public exchange yet. In February 2023, Polly Samson fired off a tweet calling Waters anti-Semitic to your rotten core. Also a Putin apologist and a lying, thieving, hypocritical, tax-avoiding, lip-syncing, misogynistic, sick with envy, megalomaniac. David Gilmour retweeted it, adding, every word demonstrably true. Waters denied the accusations and said he was getting legal advice. The door on any future collaboration seems to have been slammed, bolted, and barricaded shut. In recent interviews, Gilmour has made it crystal clear. When asked about performing with Waters again, he gave a firm absolutely not, pointing to Waters' political stances. He told one interviewer, I tend to steer clear of people who actively support genocidal and autocratic dictators. Where's the relevance? The message is unmistakable. This fight isn't about music anymore. It's about fundamental values. The story of Pink Floyd has two sides, two huge talents, and one broken legacy. Was Roger Waters the singular genius, right to fight for his artistic vision? Or was David Gilmour right to carry on the name and the music for the fans? Who do you think was the true heart of the band? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you like these deep dives into music history, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next one. In the end, the group Roger Waters hated most wasn't some rival band. It was the ghost of his own creation, an entity that kept on thriving without him, led by his greatest creative partner and rival, David Gilmour. This feud, stretching over decades, is more than just rock and roll drama. It's a tragedy about how the very things that fuel genius, ego, a singular vision, and relentless passion, can also be what destroys it. Waters saw the post-1985 Pink Floyd as a forgery, a soulless brand trading on a name that he had filled with meaning. To him, every sold-out tour and every album sold was a slap in the face. He tried to legally kill it, publicly trash it, and creatively erase it. He wasn't just fighting David Gilmour. He was fighting for control of his own story. For David Gilmour, continuing Pink Floyd was about keeping the music alive for the millions of fans who adored it. He saw the band as something bigger than one man's vision. It was a collaborative spirit, a sound, and a feeling that deserved to live on. The conflict between them is a clash of two kinds of genius, the conceptual architect versus the melodic soul. Together, they were perfectly balanced, creating work that is smart, emotional, and timeless. Apart, they've spent most of their lives defining themselves against each other. The lasting tragedy is that their greatest artistic partner became their most bitter personal enemy. The music they made together is all about connection and division, madness and empathy, absence and presence, themes that have, with heartbreaking irony, come to define their own legendary, and forever broken, relationship.